just do it. It'll turn out okay. But what's happening lately in the court system might not be okay. To discuss it here are my two guests. For those who might not know who you guys are, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Oh, you go first.
I think your mic is muted. Okay, Maya, you want to introduce yourself while his mic is having mic problems?
Yeah, sure. My name is Maya Atkinson. You can find me on my channel at Maya Atkinson. I do a number of social things. I consider myself to be a little bit of a political hobbyist, although this topic's a little heavy for me. On my show, what we're most known for is every Sunday where we do our series called Bad Science Sunday, where we take a look at debunking science misinformation on the internet.
Okay, RJ, can you talk now?
Hi, I'm back. Yeah. Suddenly it said I wasn't connected up, and so even though I was getting the stream from chat, I'm not there. So sorry.
So again, introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm RJ James Downard. I'm an old retired fart who writes a bunch of books and does YouTube Evolution Hour things where I go after effectively creationists, but also anything else that's woo and stupid. And there's so much of that around today. Oops, connection lost, reconnecting again. Wait a minute.
Oh, no,
Am I
we hear
still
you.
there?
Yeah, you're still
Okay,
here.
woo. Yeah, I'm getting weird little announcements. My signal seems to be 4 bars, so there shouldn't be a difficulty. But restream, I'm amazed any of this crap works at all. So here I am as a historian, not a lawyer, and we are going to be discussing these extraordinarily stupid things of the Dred Scott level, bad decisions from the Trumpista court. And let our lady introduce herself, dear sweet person.
She already did. While you were having when you were reconnecting.
Yeah, I was holding it down.
Uh,
But again, I'm Maya. Nice to meet you.
Ross, before we start the main topic, hey, so will the new book be available for a Christmas gift?
Oh, probably not. I suspect we won't be done with it until 2025. But for those who liked Rocks Were There 1, boy, you're going to like Rocks Were There 2. There's just so much. Plus, we're updating everything so that it's going to be as current as the original book was. And there's been a lot of water under the bridge in the 4 years since the previous volume. The creationists haven't slowed down, and neither have Jackson and I in following what they have to say, including stuff in the Intelligent Design Camp. Goodger Beckley bursts into flames in the new book.
Also, so your scientists and stuff, has anything in the first book already been out of date, or everything's still?
No, there's a few little minor wrinkles on newer paleontology stuff, but we were meticulously careful in maintaining our arguments so that they aren't going to be easily overturned by oncoming material. And it's just the matter that there's been more. There'll be a whole chapter in the new book bringing everybody up to date on what's happened on the chapters we already wrote. It's just been more plus information.
All right. Before we get to the bigger topic, let's start with it's more local, smaller, but still, I think, especially with today's Supreme Court, it still might have dramatic issues in the future, and that's Louisiana's. You have to have the Ten Commandments in the school decision thing legally.
Yeah. This one is a straight out, boy, are they asking for lawsuits, and boy, are they getting them. So FFRF and all the rest are ready to pounce and have already filed things on it. For those who have been living in a cave and don't notice, the theocrats in Louisiana in their state house have put up a thing where they will be mandating the King James version of the Ten Commandments be posted with explanatory little blips in every class from little kids' classes all the way up to high school level. And this is a blatant and absurd bit. I did a post at Spokane Faves on this point, indicating, do they really want to bring all of this up? Couldn't we use it as an excellent example of pointing out all the commandments that Donald Trump has broken? Do they really want to have Louisiana following the blue laws that are implied by the fact that you're supposed to keep the Sabbath? You're not supposed to do any labors or work on that. Are we going to be shutting down no sporting events? Are we not going to have restaurants and all that open on Sunday? I can remember blue laws where we had to be really careful on trips to remember whether gas stations would be open on Sunday. My mother was just thrilled when Sears opened up on Sunday finally.
Well, technically, technically, they're going by the letter of the law. That'd be Saturday be closed, not Sunday.
Yeah. Oh, well, there you go. Drag in the Jehovah's Witnesses and all the Saturday Sabbath people. I think when you understand the mindset of the people that write these things, that these are not the sharpest knives in the drawer. They are very dim theocratic ideologues who often push these things out over and over and over again. But this time they feel really emboldened and they have enough people to where they can actually get them passed. And quite a few states have supermajorities, particularly gerrymandered ones, that are going to be pushing this kind of claptrap. And we'll find out what will happen. Now, the irksome thing is we now have a supermajority on the Supreme Court that precedent won't matter, diddly squat, that they could do all sorts of screwball things if it gets up to the Supreme Court level, which will be more of the content of what we will be discussing on further issues. So fasten your seatbelts, kids. The next 20 years is going to be a roller coaster, regardless of what happens this November.
So, Maya, what do you think about this currently local case?
I have a little bit of a different take. I think it is, I think more, what do you call it, structured than a lot of people are thinking. I think a lot of people think, well, they're trying to be bullies. They're trying to just let everybody else know who's boss. And it's definitely as Christians and, don't come in here with your non-Christian worldview, da, 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 da. And it is that, but I think it is also a tester case where you have this really small, thing that seems kind of innocuous that will definitely reach the Supreme Court. They'll give a ruling and they'll make their opinions within that. And from those opinions, you'll be able to see what more you're able to get away with. Now, you have to remember, Louisiana is one of the states that was one of the first to eliminate abortion, and is currently holding New Orleans water treatment facilities hostage because they won't prosecute women who have abortions. So which means no, they're limited available for clean drinking water. The water treatment facilities in New Orleans are the things that hold back their dams and the levees, or however you pronounce that, so that the water doesn't flood the city, killing hundreds of thousands of people. This is what they're holding over their heads so that they will prosecute a couple of women who had to have abortions, or, it's just, it is really evil. Looking at what is, what their legislative body is trying to do, that's not even the only thing. They've also defunded, I think, their domestic violence shelters. They've defunded them because, to ostensibly force women to stay with their abusive husbands even longer, because they don't believe in breaking up families. It's better for the kids to see their mom get beaten. Yeah. Than to see her, fully functional and healthy, and well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Louisiana is weird for a state coming from a state that has, quote, drive-through daiquiris.
Daiquiris?
Yeah, they have. Louisiana has drive-through daiquiris, drive-through, but you can get daiquiri.
Interesting. I mean, that actually seems kind of cool. But I mean. Yeah, that aside, I think that, they are trying to usher in a theocracy. And this is a tester case to see how far they can go. So
Yeah,
that,
all of these things are. You're absolutely right on that. There is an agenda with this Project 2025 that, by the way, the Discovery Institute has joined in that camp. It's a practical who's who of culture camp theocratic conservatives that have had a wish list of things. So every one of these is potentially a test case that they will put forward in the hopes that the readjusted Supreme Court would be jumping on their side, just in the way that the various anti-abortion rulings ended up with Dobbs being overturning Roe v. Wade. So this will lead us into the big issues that we're dealing with, is that supermajority is starting to stretch their legs, and you're seeing Amy Barrett being a factor in here, as well as Alito and all the rest, that they have a big agenda that they'll want to get through. And if you think that this year is going to be fun, wait till you see the stuff that may be coming on downstream.
Yeah. So do you think this will be an issue if it gets all the way to the Supreme Court? They'll say every state has the right to decide, take command on their own, or is it be a federal thing? Or
Oh, Dobbs clearly shows we cannot assume anything about how that court is going to fly particular issues. Whoops, it looks like connection is getting bouncy again.
Yeah.
Am I still here?
Yeah,
yeah, you're still here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
and I certainly agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, in the Dobbs case, they're quoting like 12th century like English law for whatever reason.
The source base on these rulings has been absolutely screwball. The Bumstock case is rather notorious, as people have been noticing that Justice Thomas was relying on a web posting from a virulent gun right extremist group as if it were a legitimate thing. And you know what that reminded me of? Scalia, back in his dissent to Edwards v. Aguilar, the anti-evolution case back in the 1980s, where he was accepting the stipulations of the creationists like they're legit. And that's exactly the same mindset. We're seeing the problem. I don't think anyone can ever accuse most Supreme Court justices or most jurists as being terribly scientifically literate. But the idea that you should have somebody that is a scientific illiterate on the court is kind of standard procedure for the people that will make it through the Federalist Society and into the courts on this front. So the Bumstock ruling, the immunity case didn't really surprise me. It's a complex, wacky thing that technically will mean that nobody can prosecute Biden for doing legal actions, although then they'll start quibbling, well, maybe they're not official acts according to this. So part of the illusion here is the idea that mere legal rulings can absolutely insulate you from manipulative and ideologically motivated actors. And we know from how the Roman Empire declined, and we know how things happened in the 1920s and 30s regarding the rise of the Nazis, that you can have the law being used in ways that are terribly corrosive. And one of the problems I see with this current justices is I don't think they think through the consequences of this stuff. They're looking at it from their little tunnel vision ideology. I think when they overturned Roe, I think they will be aware that there was a much more extremist anti-abortion group hovering in the wings. But their brain really isn't bothering about that. They're following their legal precisions and not really concerned about the consequences of their actions.
Yeah, I don't know if your state was affected by it. Of course, last election we overturned it, so for my state it's fine. But during that time, my state became famous for having to let a 10-year-old leave the state to get an abortion because she was raped. A 10-year-old.
Washington State is in an interesting spot because we're right next door to Idaho. And if Eastern Washington is fairly conservative, but metropolitan Spokane is a different kettle of fish because we have a lot of colleges here. And so there's a different dynamic. Most of the population, however, is on the west side of the state. Although you do occasionally see little Trump signs going on the interstate in the farmlands and that, it's very much a blue state overall. And so we have been a bastion over here in Spokane for people who need abortion care over in extremist Idaho. They just drive across the border to Spokane and away we go. And that's happening in a lot of areas where I understand Planned Parenthood is trying to develop a system of basically mobile clinics that can park just outside the border in a state that doesn't have these draconian rules. I don't think for a second that the doofuses on the Supreme Court thought 1 microsecond about the implications of what was going to happen in terms of actual practical outcome on this. The fact of the matter is that you've got quite a few people on the court that don't have uteruses, and so they have a worldview that by definition is not really thinking about this. And you had the 3 justices put on by Trump, plus Alito and Thomas. Another example of the tremendous corruption in the current court is in this recent ruling on the presidential immunity. By what possible ethical imagination would Alito and Thomas not have recused themselves because they're too knee deep, particularly in regards to their screwball wives, in January 6th? And that would have brought the threshold below the level that they would have needed to be able to bring it up in court anyway. So they have to simply pretend that they aren't compromised in a way that they are and rule anyway. This is a Dred Scott Taney court level of just clueless matters. And they're going to be ruling on so many things. My worry is that just as the anti-abortion rules, oh, you're about ready to think of something to jump in there, Lamont.
I forget, was Dred Scott the thing before the Civil War, or the thing?
Yes, that was basically greasing the skids, where it said, slaves are property, and a slave owner has perfect right to go into a free state and kidnap the person and bring them back to slavery because they're property, like a chair.
I wasn't sure if that was the Dred Scott, that was the before Civil War, or that was the...
It was 1850, I think it was. 1850, 51, somewhere around there.
The other one I was thinking of was the late 1800s, but, the...
Leslie v. Ferguson, the separate but equal stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was in the 1890s, as I recall. And, of course, that had just a wonderful bit about segregation. But even at that, the Taney decision was kind of pretty much Taney's thing. There have even some legal scholars that have gone around to say, was he really kind of an activist in this regard? And that's another thing that's just hilarious about these conservatives on the court, all of whom would probably pass themselves off as judicial originalists. But they're not. They're extremely selective originalists. For decades now, we've had rulings that have undermined the issues of gun regulations. And I don't know of any single instance where any of the rulings have ever included that well-regulated militia part in their reasoning. So they just decide that's not there and they don't have to worry about it. Well, what the hell does a well-regulated militia mean? So they're originalist in air quotes. Not for real. Maya, you want to weigh in so I don't hog the show?
I usually don't weigh in on the Second Amendment stuff because people get super technical with it. But to my knowledge, the Supreme Court has never addressed the whole well-regulated militia part.
Yeah, it's like it isn't really there.
Yeah, it's just like, well, the people should have guns, and that's clearly what they meant, and we're just gonna ignore this little.
There was there was the guy who did A Year of Living Biblically, and he's also now done Year of Living Constitutionally, which really underscores how different the world of 1790 was to today. And I think that's an extremely useful illustration. Not that any of the clowns on the court on the Trumpista side are likely to be paying any attention to that, but nevertheless, it's an informative little issue here. The thing that really blew me away about the gun stock ruling is this weird obsession about what finger that you're using. In fact, original forms, when the thing was originally, the law was written about automatic weapons, there were a bunch of different ways that an automatic weapon could function. So they decided, just as a convenience, that they would just refer to the trigger. But when you know how rapid the fire can be on these modified guns, yes, they're having to kind of pull the trigger in a variety of ways, but you can still go, which is a machine gun. And the fact that Thomas's brain could recalibrate itself to not pay any attention to that is exactly the same level of obtuseness that I was seeing in Scalia in regards to his Edwards v. Aguilar decision. And that's why the Dobbs ruling overturned Roe v. Wade from the 1970s. Edwards v. Aguilar, that prevented creationism from being taught in the schools, is the 1980s. It's a decade later. And so, and Alito, and the other ones on the court that just worship at the feet of Scalia's memory, why couldn't they be dusting off Scalia's dissent if one of these little anti-evolution things gets reintroduced and bump upstairs, and we could have creationism taught in the schools, not just intelligent design? Can I rule that out with the current court? No.
Yeah, usually the Supreme Court's supposed to like overturn bad decisions, like how Brown versus Board of Education overturned the 1890 thing.
That yes and no. The Supreme Court has been problematic in the U.S. history. For instance, they thought that Japanese internment camps were just fine.
I did not realize that was the Supreme Court. I thought that was a presidential thing.
Well, it started there, certainly.
Originally, the internments were done kind of unilaterally by California under Governor Earl Warren, who later became a bastion of liberalism in years. That's how people transformed their framework. And then it got picked up with the greasing, the fact that there was an awful lot of land grabbing going on, of where Japanese families and farmland was basically confiscated and they never ever got it back. And so there's always watch out who profits from an activity. The thing that is also going to be a ticking time bomb all over the landscape is the new court, and this is Barrett and others that are really kind of leading the charge here, is something that conservatives have wanted for years, which is basically gutting the regulation state, so that the whole federal regulation issues, that you have the FDA and you have the Securities Exchange Commission and all these other things that can make regulations applying to businesses and how much they can pollute, and the Environmental Protection Agency, they're basically setting all of that on fire. And the ones who want their privileges maintained are at the champagne toasting level as to how much this is going to be helping their cause, but it ain't going to be helping working people. And it will, while producing probably mess for the next 20 years, also will be fueling a level of progressive reform orientation, I hope, amongst the younger generation, that I hope will rival or surpass what was going on 100 years ago in the Teddy Roosevelt era.
Yeah, I mean, that was really interesting. Just seeing those decisions come out in the same week, it's like everybody can be sued except the president.
So speaking of the president, do you think this thing has anything to do with that Gen 6 thing, or is it? Are they not connected at all?
It's complicated. I think. Remember, if the judges on the courts are Tortugan minds, in the same way that Kent Hovind is a Tortugan mind, and your average anti-evolutionist is a Tortugan mind, and Donald Trump is a Tortugan mind, somebody with a mind shell that has a dogma, and they only pay attention to stuff and they never fact check anything. And there's plenty of signs of that. They're not going to be bothering about that aspect. On the one hand, there's a legitimate argument that this ruling has insulated presidents from being attacked for just doing their job. And you can easily have seen, look at the Comer and that over in the House, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, our poster child for not Trumpista, constantly wanting to impeach everybody in sight and not actually getting anywhere. Well, this puts some break. I'm getting a connection lost warning again.
You're kind of in and out, but yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It seems to go on and off. It's. I'm again. I have to profess amazement as we're talking about the dissolution of the republic and the gloom and doom of what may be facing us, that we also are utilizing a fantastically sophisticated technology that occasionally glitches up and allows people from all over the place to be communicating in a way that is absolutely unprecedented. Which means, what effing excuse do we have for being stupid? We don't.
So you two, what are the consequences, if there are any, of anything a leader does is above the law? It's pretty much that's what this place is going. This is going or not.
Yeah. What will be the squishy zone is what constitutes an official act. So, is anything that a president issues as a proclamation by definition not assailable? So, Trump is casually saying he's going to, by executive order, decree that the children of immigrants born in the United States aren't citizens. Excuse me, the Constitution explicitly says otherwise. Sorry. And so, how is that going to deal with it? The notion that any simplistic legalistic rule can get around a dogmatic ideologue, that's not actually the case. And that's why you have to worry about the hopes that merely having laws there, the laws are essential to be able to keep the system running efficiently. But no law can, in principle, insulate you from criminality or people distorting the law or using it, manipulating it in their favor. In the same way that Putin in Russia is always getting people on perfectly, air quotes, legal laws about spying and all the rest. They trump up the charges. They have sham trials. Same thing that the Chinese do at the PRC. And yet they're following the law.
So do you guys think that at this current rate, America could go as far as Russia and other territorial states like that, or you think we will eventually stop that?
If the Project 25 is enacted in either a Trump administration or any future Trumpista, air quotes, GOP administration, yeah, that's the sort of slippery slopes that I never thought I would ever live to see, even in the times that we've seen where things have skirted the edge, like Nixon did in the 1970s. Oh, and by the way, that ruling effectively gave a get out of jail free card. You can't do a damn thing about Nixon. They couldn't have dealt with him on that front because this thing basically insulates him retroactively.
Yeah, I'll speak. I thought you made it up. Like, Nixon was a terrible person like that, but he got us into the Clean Act stuff while Trump was trying to get us out of the Clean Act stuff.
Oh, yeah. Nixon is a really complicated person. As an old fart who lived in the Nixon administration, I can attest to that. He was very problematic in many ways. He wanted to show how caring he was. So he was going to show how much better he could do the Great Society. And so almost all of the things that people complain about the LBJ Great Society welfare programs were done under Nixon. And he also showed what an environmentalist he was with the Environmental Protection Administration. He also had an imperial streak, trying to do things that the Trumpistas are suggesting they might like to do too, which is like sequestering of funds. One of the things that I would have thought would have been a legitimate area for impeaching Nixon at the time was he would just say, I don't care whether Congress has appropriated money to do X, I'm not going to spend it. Well, what does this mean then as the person who executes the laws, not makes the laws? And that kind of got shuffled to the side because all the Watergate stuff came along. But the sequestration of funds, impounding of funds, I think is absolutely unconstitutional. And yet, what would this new administration theoretically do? Ask the people of Cambodia how much Nixon cared. Oh, yeah. Well, remember, the whole area, we had the Kissinger area, Kissinger, whose, my opinion of which has dropped on a steady decline in all of the years since the 1970s, as opposed to Zbigniew Brzezinski, Carter's Secretary of State, who my opinion of him always went up over the years. Yeah, it was a very problematic administration. Ironically, another curious feature about Nixon, which is very different from Trump, is Nixon was not a personally corrupt person on the financial end. He wasn't accepting giant grafts. He didn't have businesses on his own that he was funneling money in the same way Trump would always make sure when he's going to be at the convention in Milwaukee, he's not staying in Milwaukee. Trump is going to stay over in Chicago at one of his hotels so that everybody hanging around him has to funnel money into his coffers because he owns the damned hotel, including the Secret Service. So that is actually an area where Nixon was not at that level of personal self-interested corruption. He had an ideology, had people around him, and attempted to do things and push the boundary layers. But Nixon is an amateur compared to Trump in the corruption department.
I know. Another president that Republican conservatives used to worship was Reagan. And I think I find this ironic. I do this line sometimes, that when I say famous lines was tear this wall down, well, Trump's line is build this wall up.
Oh, yeah. And I'm an old Reagan voter, so I can be annoyingly smug on this. In fact, an awful lot of my progressive friends, the Bernie Sanders types, go, what? You voted for Reagan? Well, at the time,
everyone did.
I wasn't unalloyed in my support of Reagan. I always had worries about his Central American policy.
And, well, I mean, you have to remember Reagan's second term, he won every state except one. He was insanely popular in his day.
With an economy worse than the one Biden has, with higher unemployment, higher inflation rates, and he won in a gigantic landslide. And yet poor Biden is in trouble. Part of the reason why, I think, figures on two variables. One, unless you're as old as I am, you will never have experienced an inflation environment. That was all squeezed out post the Reagan years from the 1980s. So nobody has seen above 2% inflation during their entire lifetime. So they have no idea how serious the inflation was that was flirting with 15% when they were finally pulling the plug on. And we had to go through a recession with 20% interest rates and 10% unemployment. I mean, that Biden managed to ease us out of this little minor inflation blip without a recession. And I think that was an astonishingly good maneuver. And it wasn't because of any Democratic policies that were put in, but because we rebounded very, very quickly from the pandemic, which was a good thing to do. Every state, every nation that has done that rapid recovery thing had an inflation spurt.
Real fast. So Maya, get your opinion in here.
On which question?
On whatever we've been talking about so far.
Okay. I don't know. I remember one of the things you said was if Project 2025 comes to fruition, we're going to be seeing Russia. I think that we would, if we get Project 2025, like as they are detailing it out, we would hope to get back to Russia. I think we're looking more at like, was it Iraq, where women are, they used to walk around, it's like, hey, I can show all my arms. And, now they're walking around in full burqas. I believe Iraq is also this state that has.
Was that Iraq or Iran? Or is that both?
Well, Iraq does that to some extent. Afghanistan makes Iraq look like liberal land. That one is an interesting area because the younger generation in Iran cannot stand the current regime, and they are holding power in exactly the same way that the old Shah did, which was by a police state fear and terror thing. And although I'm a cockeyed optimist, I think before this century is out, the mullahs are going to be out of power in Iran. But that's a long time down the road.
It was the Shah. Was that the thing that the America supported because they were communists or something like that?
Oh yeah, and again, it resonates in my head because the Shah of Iran and Marcos's Philippines and that all had their pavilions at the Spokane World's Fair in 1974 that we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of. That I was one of the little minor minions that went around knocking on people's doors to get the World's Fair off the ground back then in the early 70s. But we had overthrown, the CIA had overthrown the reformist, semi-communist Mossadegh administration in Iraq in the 50s, and the Shah was brought back into power, and we supported him, and the Nixon administration supported him steadfastly all during that period. And we just looked the other way on the seething cauldron of resentment. Well, once the mullahs took power, holy smokes, then they just cracked down on that stuff. But there's, in some respects, there's been strange elements. For example, evolution is still taught in Iranian schools. They never reformed the educational system, that it still operates, as opposed to, say, Saudi Arabia, which is practically flat earth for a lot of their official teachings in that thing. So there's a huge range. So everybody should avoid using Muslim and Islam as a blanket term to describe everything in that entire environment, where there's a huge spectrum from semi-liberal states and theocratic monarchies and non-Arab Muslim countries like Indonesia, Malaysia. So you have a much more complicated mix to it, and don't try to put a tar in one brushstroke bit. We wouldn't expect, however, that level of nuance in a second Trump administration, because they're going to want to go hell-bent to try to get rid of somehow. You see how effective the Trump administration was in dislodging the Iraqis, or for that matter, Maduro. I'm speaking about ghosts from the Reagan administration, when they dusted out, brought out of mothballs Elliot Abrams from the old Reagan administration to try to deal with Maduro during the Trump administration. I'm going, this idiot didn't know what he was doing back in the 1980s. Why should we think he's going to do any better in the 21st century? And he didn't.
Yeah.
Yikes,
Yeah,
people need to have more memory.
Speaking of Iraq, I also find it ironic or funny that, a few years ago about the statue thing. Well, we tore down Saddam's statue in Iraq. No one cared. We threw King George's statue in the revolution. No one cared. But also we're throwing down statues in the South. Everyone cares.
Oh, well, a lot of the culture campers are just having conniption fits to this day, and they're trying to get some of, Robert E. Lee statues and stuff put back up in some of these states. How successful they'll be is a questionable one. I'm sure if somebody wanted to put up a gigantic Statue of Liberty side gold-plated picture statue of Trump anywhere he wanted, he would be thrilled, because he's a malignant narcissist, and so long as he's got his mug on things, he's happy without the consequences of it. That's the other factor that's going to be an interesting thing that's going to be playing out over years, long after Trump is gone, because he's not immortal, is what the hell is the party formerly known as GOP, but currently the Trumpista party, going to do post-Trump? And in 2028 and 2032 and 2036, the demographics, the people that vote in a Marjorie Taylor Greene or sustain a Lindsey Graham in the Carolinas, that hasn't disappeared. And we have the difficulty is that somebody like a Trump is a polarizer by nature. He thrives on people going at one another as viciously as possible, so he can then be looking on the thing and exploit it as effectively as possible. He's not somebody who can ever dampen down things. And the extent to which future administrations are having to deal with that extremist demographic that hasn't gone away. 75 million people voted for Trump in 2020. Will there be the same amount this time around? Will there be even more? How many of the 20, 30, 40 million people who didn't vote at all during the election will sit it out, or some of them in the wrong areas vote for RFK Jr. and his brain worm? Everything is all in flux. I'm uncertain.
So, about you, Maya?
Sorry, what was the last question?
I said, what about you?
Yeah, I know, but what was the last question?
I have no idea.
I have that effect on people.
Are they sometimes this goes on and on, 2 or 3 questions in one thing?
No, yeah. I mean, I love your examples. They're very enlightening. Just talking about I'll chime in on what's coming, what's going to be upcoming, and it is very interesting. And I know that the GOP is looking for it, looking towards that, because Trump is going to be gone soon. What we're hoping is that he is not re-elected, because that's going to make a really big difference in how they move forward. They are pretty much
choose judicial appointments.
Yeah.
That's one of the critical factors, because there's several of the ones on the court that may die over the next few years and who is president of the United States, as we all need to just perform the thought experiment of, had Hillary Clinton made it in 2016, you wouldn't have had that supermajority on the court. They would have been replaced with liberals. You wouldn't have had that power that the Federalist Society would have, where they would be giving lists of nominees to Donald Trump. And they said, would you like a side of fries with that, Kavanaugh? It had that level of superficiality to it. And so many of the dumb rulings that have been coming down in the circuit courts are from Trump appointees. This has consequences. Yes. And so we're already saddled with the ones that were put on the court by Mitch McConnell, ramming them through as quickly as possible. We can't risk ever having that again.
Oh, yeah.
So it's to the point of where we can never have a Republican president so long as they are in this Trumpista stripe, period.
McConnell did say he was stepping down, and he is really low. So I don't know that he can get reelected in Kentucky. So at least there's that. But again, all of the old guard Republicans, where it was just like we're going to be racist, but keep it hidden, have been replaced with QAnoners and who don't care about facts at all. And it's going to be interesting to see, because we don't have the old Republicans. It's really hard to say that what they're going to do. What they seem to only want to do is follow whatever the zeitgeist is in the red states that they're coming from, and feed the fodder on that. So, but we do know it's not going to be better. It's not going to be tempered. The fact that they have so many problems trying to find a speaker speaks volumes.
Yeah, you mentioned.
This was a problem for Trump right off the bat, as he didn't understand how divided his own, air quotes, Republican Party was. That's why he could never get Obamacare corrected. There's so many things he could never get an infrastructure bill through. There were a whole bunch of things that he didn't understand what the interest groups were, because he had no experience. Being president was literally the first job Donald Trump ever held as an employee. He had always been a self-employed, largely incompetent business failure over decades, who is great at self-promotion, but not necessarily being able to do anything.
Yeah, you mentioned Mitch McConnell. I still find it ironic that when 2016 election is going on, he's like, "Oh, we can't approve any Supreme Court courts during the transitional period."
Oh yeah,
Trump was
blatant flip-flop
in 2020. Like, get them all through real fast. Like,
I have 3 layers of contempt for the Trumpistas. The first layer is my contempt for Trump himself, a malignant narcissist, a pathological Roy Cohn liar, a January 6th traitor, an absolute business incompetent that I think if we had his tax returns, we could verify that he's never made a dime in his entire life. He's only squandered other people's money, literally. But the second tier are the true believer ones, who I have a contempt for, but I can understand it. These are young earth creationist mindsets, or people who have a methodology just as bad if they don't fall into that box directly. They seriously believe what they do. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene really believes everything she says with absolute honest conviction. Then the ones that I want for the lower level of hell, the serious ones that I absolutely have contempt for, are the manipulative, power-hungry suck-ups. Lindsey Graham, J.D. Vance, and others, who in their little back recesses know full well what a scuzzbucket Trump is. But J.D. Vance has become a senator because he's been able to retool himself to the Trumpista mode. These are people who I have more contempt for than a Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is merely an effing idiot.
Yeah. So let's talk about this real fast.
But also still contempt for her.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. But it's a different class.
Yeah. Maya brings up a good point to other people too. Like, a lot of people's problem with, I guess, Biden is he's old or something about Trump. But anyways, if the worst happens and he does pass away, is his vice president, do you think he's ready to go or continue this stuff?
I think so. In 2020, my initial ticket that I wanted to see was Harris Buttigieg. And it was, Biden wasn't even my second or third choice down the road until he finally got the circumstances on it. So that doesn't bother me.
Third from the bottom
on that
for me.
So long as Biden has a pulse, he also is ethical and reasonably intelligent. And there's not a doubt in my mind that I would be voting for him because Donald Trump is unqualified in every possible circumstance. And the venal monsters hovering around in the brink to come in with him, what he would be doing as president again. He could be pardoning Bannon again. He could be doing all sorts of venal things that are going on. This is an unacceptable option for me. Now, if Trump or if Biden finds that in the course of this, before we get to the convention, even that he finally hears from enough people that he trusts, and it would have to really be Nancy Pelosi and Jeffries and quite a few movers and shakers in the core part of the party that say it's time, stay president, but let Harris, or they would have to have some agreed upon candidate to come up as, but how can you deny it to the sitting vice president? Why would you say that Harris is a legitimate successor to Biden as vice president, but shouldn't be on there? So they're really in that option is the only pliable one. If that turned out to be the case, again, I would be voting for that. There's no doubt in my mind on that. It's the stakes with the Project 25 and the issues of what you need to have a president and people in the House and Senate who can act as brakes on the churning mess of people that are still controlling state houses and all the rest. The stakes are just drastically significant. And it's not just local United States, because the presence of an isolationist Republican Party in this time of international worries. I had to stop watching Forrest Volkai on a particular episode that he was having where he was just going ballistic and flame coming out of his head. And I adore Forrest shows, but he's in that group of young people who are legitimately outraged over the Gaza genocide. Let's use that term because they tend to use it. I think that's a highly loaded. Yeah, it's not an inaccurate terminology. There's an awful lot of rubble of that's going on, and I'm queasy about it. In the same way, Chuck Schumer and Biden have been queasy about it. At the same time, there is a natural inclination not to suddenly pull the plug out from under Israel at a time when they've got Hezbollah on one front and Iran ready to go after on the other. And so there's a lot of issues going on. And I would suspect that a certain amount of the exhaustion that Biden was feeling, even though he got back from Europe 10, 12 days before the debate, was the fact that he's been having to keep close tabs on something that they have not talked about in public because you'd be an idiot to do so, which is trying to figure out how to shuffle the players around, to keep the Palestinian-Israeli conflict from expanding to the neighbors and bringing in massive power influences and escalating as things can do, and also trying to actually generate a two-state solution and somehow or other make sure that the nutball Hamas, which hasn't had an election and is despised by an awful lot of Palestinians as well, but they can't say so because they've got a dictatorial regime that will prevent them from, they can be punished for it. Trying to sort through all of that stuff and coming out in a way that actually helps people, that could have been on his mind a lot. You think?
Oh, yeah, and I do want to respond to this. I know there's a lot of people who are saying, well, Biden should step down and, it should be somebody that we like that's going to replace them. And I think it's really idealistic to think that would happen, for one. I mean, I don't dislike Gavin Newsom, which seems to be the person that I'm hearing is most on people's mind. I don't like it for a couple of reasons. One, just being nobody voted for him. We just had a whole primary season where,
exactly. Yeah.
A bunch of people stepped up to the plate. And if Joe Biden steps down, it should be whoever number 2 is, or Kamala Harris. To say that it should not be Kamala Harris, she is the heir apparent. That is what a vice president is. It is Joe Biden. Right now, these are your realistic choices. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, fascism. That's it. Now we can talk.
I like the line that David Sedaris said, that I saw it on Twitter, that I think summed it up better than everything that I've ever seen. It says, you're on an airplane and your 2 choices for dinner is chicken and steaming turd. And your approach is to ask how the chicken is being prepared?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's either you get chicken or the plane crashes. I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
this is where we're at. You may say chicken flaming herd, who is Kamala Harris, and then the plane crashes, which would be Trump. But I mean, it. There's no way that bypassing Kamala goes well. One, she wants to be president. We already know this.
Well, she
She's
ran for
gonna
president. Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
there is. I remember 4 years ago there was talk about her not accepting the vice presidency because she thought it was beneath her, and they were like, "Idiot! This is the easiest way to rerun for
Yeah,
president."
Isn't that what they said to Teddy Roosevelt? We'll get rid of him by making him vice president. Then,
Oh yeah,
well, I mean, which is
and that's why you always pay attention to who the hell is vice president,
yes,
because the lesson that the Republicans learned when they thought they could exile Teddy Roosevelt to oblivion by making him McKinley's vice president, and then one little bullet up at the Buffalo Exposition made him president. Things watch out about that. So my idea that now Trump, his vice president has got to be a sycophantic doormat who will do whatever he wants whenever he asks, how high can you jump?
yeah, even worse than the last one. Even worse than
yeah, White Walker Pence was boring enough. I think he was a terrible governor, and he was an immensely evasive person, and in many respects still is an immensely evasive person. But even he can't support Trump this time around, and that tells you how divisive all this is. Here's a shocker, that the time frame is such that a lot of people might not realize, but I'm old enough to remember when there used to be liberal Republicans, not less moderate, more moderate Republicans, middle of the road ones. I'm talking about flaming liberal Republicans, not quite at Bernie Sanders level, but nevertheless left of the party liberal Republicans. That vaporized after the 80s.
Was that like before or after the Southern Switch thing people talk about?
Oh, well, yeah, this was all during that period in the, basically the turn of the century all the way down to the 1970s. In my lifetime, it would be reflected by the Nelson Rockefeller wing of the party, which would be the liberal Republicans. So they were more or less pro-business, Rockefeller, duh. But nonetheless had social issues. One of the presence of all of those liberal Republicans and middle of the road Republicans is why the Civil Rights Act was passed with so many Republican supporters, as opposed to down in the South, where hyper-conservative, soon to become Republican Democrats, and what few Republicans were in the South, they voted against it like mad. And Dinesh D'Souza, the little troll, he tries to manipulatively spin that record to make people think that the progress that was made when the Republican Party was very different than it is now somehow adheres to the shrunken homunculus of the air quotes GOP. That is, I refuse to even call them Republicans because they're not. They're Trumpistas. And it is an insult to Lincoln to pretend that they are.
Oh, yeah. And really quick, just wrapping up my original point, because I know you want to move on. One, Harris is going to throw a fit. There's going to be a lot of people who are assuming that she's being bypassed because she's either Black and or a woman, and they're going to throw a fit. Trying to bypass her is going to tear the party apart, and it is more or less going to ensure that Trump gets the vote. So Caden, I see you. It takes way more than that to piss me off, or even get me to clutch my pearls. I don't believe the party is trying to get rid of Biden. There's a lot of things that I'm seeing that make me think that per se, but the fact that the biggest one is just the fact that Biden hasn't stepped down. And again, at the end of the day, I honestly don't think it matters. I, at this time, would vote for Joe Biden's dead corpse over any Republican because of Project 2025.
Yeah.
Why? Because a president always... I don't know what people think presidents are. They're just kind of a little guy. They come out, they wave their hat, they rubber stamp the bills that Congress makes. So there's if you look at Joe Biden's history, the things that he's co-signed while he was a senator, like, I mean, they were atrocious. There's a lot of reasons that people don't like him, didn't want him to be president. Um, Everybody's like, wow, he's been a way more liberal president. And I'm like, well, okay, yeah, but look at his Build Back Better plan. Had a lot of AOC's Green New Deal in it. So, I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I
you're
was
voting
absolutely
for
blown
a
away.
party, not a person. Try to think about voting that you're voting for your own best interest, not so Joe Biden can be president. I'm sorry. Go ahead, RJ.
Yeah, the agenda that the Biden administration pushed through and kept in place, despite the fact that they lost Congress in 2022. So there was every reason to think that that was going to get gutted by the revolving door of speakers that were coming along there. They managed to prevent that from happening. Another factor that plays in with Kamala Harris, has she hit the ground running on the abortion issue? Holy smokes. And that is a seriously important issue that it's so important that Trump himself has had to kind of hedge his bets to try to step away from an extremist agenda on abortion, because part of his little self-interest brain says this could be a problem for my reelection. And the same way that he's backed off from some of the Project 25 thing as usual. I don't know anything about that. I don't. Excuse me, you were schmoozing with the guy that wrote the damn thing. You got your picture with him. It's like Epstein.
Yeah, before we get to the 2025 thing, yeah, I don't know. I mentioned this on Twitter or not, but yeah, I don't know if our third candidate is worse, better, or the same as Trump with his anti-vax stance and all that stuff.
RFK Jr. is not only
crazy.
an extremist screwball, but the fact of anybody that I've ever heard speak, his voice would absolutely cause you to flee the room. It is just it's absolute horrifying drone. I could imagine this man trying to do a State of the Union message, but he doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of being president any more than Ralph Nader did. The most that can be said is that in certain key swing states where the votes were only a few thousand or a few hundred or could even be tens of votes, that it would be theoretically possible that he could act as spoiler, exactly as happened, which is why George Bush won in 2020 because of Florida and Nader, and the reason why Trump was able to squeak through enough to get the electoral vote, even though he lost the popular vote. I'm not.
Sorry, it's the only reason that RFK Jr. is even this far so far is because of who his father was.
Oh, and he's got an ego. He's got a tremendous ego. I'm sure he seriously thinks he's the harbinger of the future and all of that. There's quite a few of these people that have this. I mean, you don't go into running for president unless you have a certain fire in your belly, which is why some people, when Colin Powell was being asked, he said no. Because I don't have that fire in the belly. You have to have that. We've had narcissists as president. Teddy Roosevelt was a narcissist, not a malignant narcissist, an unaccomplished buffoon in the class of a Donald Trump, but still. So ambition and the like is not a surprise. The areas that concern me are politicians who are tactical and manipulative. The thing to bring back some history and some musical, Hamilton. And the whole issue of why Alexander Hamilton did not support Aaron Burr against Thomas Jefferson in 1800, I think it was, the election where they had a split decision on it. And it was one of the reasons why Burr hated Hamilton for the rest of his life, because his career was thwarted.
Yeah, because even I think Hamilton was Federalist and Jefferson
Federalist, and Jefferson was Democrat Republican, the ancestors of the Democratic Party.
But even he decided, no, this guy's better than this other guy.
Because Jefferson believed something. And Hamilton said the problem with Burr is that he doesn't believe anything. He only is in it for power. And that kind of personality, I think, is a part of what goes on in a J.D. Vance. It's certainly what goes on in a Mitch McConnell. It's certainly what goes on in a Lindsey Graham. And so these are people who will manipulate, and they can be hypocrites par excellence in a different way than your entrenched ideologue is. Somebody who actually has an ideological position, but they also have ethics and integrity. That's one of the reasons why Goldwater, of all people, his reputation has tended to look better over the years, because he had principles and very right-wing ones, but at the same time was also an honest, decent person, and surprised an awful lot of people in a lot of the positions that he would be taking in the time to come. So personality and ethics and principles matter along with the policies. If somebody has the wrong policies and a temperament that's wrong for the part, either one of those is a disqualifier. Both of them together is like, duh. And that's what we're facing a choice with whoever is the Democratic candidate, Biden, Harris, fill in the blank, someone with a pulse, versus the convicted one, the spawn of evil, the most dangerous person ever to be in the political arena, and who I spit upon and fart in his general direction.
So, for those who might not know what this is, do you guys explain what 2025 is?
Launch into it. Go for it, Maya.
Death of a nation.
It's a Federalist Society screed, and it's available online. You can download it. The 2023 edition of it is available at a PDF, and I really recommend everyone do that and look through it. Don't have to take our word for it.
I'm looking for the screen share, but I can't seem to find it right now. I can't seem to find it.
Once I found a link to it, they're not always the ones who tout it are not typically ones who want to link to it so everyone can see. They tend to want to remain in an insular little bubble. I've noticed that on Twitter and that. But I happened to encounter somebody who was bringing this topic up, and they were critical of it. And that secondary account they had a direct link to the bloody thing. So I immediately downloaded it. It was because of the thing about the Discovery Institute, the fact that they joined. They weren't in the original group that was the advisors on the Project 25, but they've joined along with it. And NRA is a joiner, and some of these other things that have popped up, National Gun Group. And so that immediately piqued my curiosity, because that means I want to look more into it. When you find a group that I've already been studying in the anti-evolution movement coming into the thing, I already knew the connections that Tony Perkins's bunch, Family Research Council, is also on the advisory board. So you've got people who are intelligent design advocates. You have people who are Ken Ham creationists. And then you've got, the Speaker of the House, who's a young Earth creationist. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a young Earth creationist. So there's a worldview lurking behind this. And it is anti-abortion. It is anti-environmentalist. It is anti-workers' rights. It is generally kind of isolationist. Or if it is internationalist, it's internationalist in favor of right-wing thugs as opposed to opposing left-wing thugs. And so you get a tremendous, the mandate for leadership. And it's written in very tidy bureaucratese, but lurking behind it are things to dismantle the so many departments. They would like to get rid, as I recall, of the Department of Education. They would like to eliminate wokeness, which is the idea that marginalized groups should be kind of included. Remember, these are the sort of people that would like to see, as Justice Thomas would, overturning gay marriage, which I find just gobsmackingly hypocritical, because he and I are both old enough to remember a time when interracial marriage was illegal in a lot of states. And so this rank culture camp hypocrisy, it's behind it, even if not explicitly discussed. When you look at the people, Moms for Liberty and a lot of these other groups, you find the hyper-conservative Roman Catholics that now has Candace Owen joining the parade. You have your out-and-out racist types like Nick Fuentes and others that are circulating. These are the people hovering around the network. There is no unified cabal that's behind all of this stuff, but there are people who attend some of the same conventions. They interact like the CPAC, Conservative Congress, and this interacts with their right-wing counterparts abroad. Like you had Orban of Hungary, who's an authoritarian, and others who would come in. One of the meetings that Tucker Carlson conducted was actually held in Hungary. So there's this culture camp network that goes on. And I, as a historian, look at all of this period, and I'm getting heebie-jeebie cringes, because this reminds me way too much of what was going on in the 1920s, which, as we know, led to the 1930s, when everything fell apart in the Great Depression and the rise of full-out totalitarianism in a bunch of countries. And the 1940s, where tens of millions of people died in global conflagration and war and holocausts. That's not good. So we're in the little cusp moment where we're making decisions at local, city, state, federal, and international levels that are going to be pushing our direction for decades to come. And some of that may or may not be cajoled and helped by the topic of the subject, which is all these stupid Supreme Court rulings. But I can guarantee you that decisions that need to be made are less likely to occur with somebody that believes, as the anti-climate change Project 25 would be thinking. So anybody that's young, their life is going to be screwed if these people are in charge. And that although there'll be interest groups that will be favoring these sorts of things, they're less likely to be able to make any headway if they aren't in control of the House and the Senate and the presidency.
I thought some of it that number one, restore the family as the centerpiece of the American life and
their version of family. With the candidate, Mr. Trump, 3 times divorced, fornicating, porn star pumping hedonist. I mean, the hypocrisy is rank. At least Nixon had the advantage that he wasn't a philanderer. Now, he had that going for him at least. FDR and Kennedy didn't have that, and Clinton, of course, didn't have that in their favor, but they were good presidents.
Well, and you have to remember, restore the family just means kick women out of the workplace, prevent them from having their own bank accounts, and or any kind of independence. There's a lot of things that they're trying to do right now, that they're trying to find mechanisms to be able to go through and prevent for and it's a little evil. It's not even like, okay, well, not just us, for everyone.
Yeah, so
that you cannot have progress as a people when anyone is marginalized. And the problem is that the people in that cushy Federalist Society worldview, a thing of wealthy bankers and resorts and private airplanes and an insular world where they have been able to accrue and hold on and expand their wealth base. We have an income distribution, and I'm a market capitalist. I'm not a socialist, but it just scares the daylights out of me how unequal our economic system is. And this is despite the fact that almost everybody is in agreement about what an egalitarian and appropriate income distribution would be, whether you're left or right. This is a surprising finding of various research works on that. The difficulty is that we don't have that. We have a banana republic distribution. And the Republican, air quotes, Trumpista party is absolutely committed, and the Project 2025 is absolutely committed to reinforcing that level of income inequality through the tax code. They aren't going to get any reforms through.
Yeah, I always find it funny when they say "Make America Great Again." Like, when was this a great America you're talking about? When was the cutoff date that America stopped being great?
They have an illusory memory on this. It's fair to say that Obama handed Trump a fairly robust economy, not perfect, but fairly robust. He dug us out of a humongous hole from the 2008 meltdown under Bush. And that was an astonishingly successful phenomenon that went on and shot the stock market up to record highs and all of that. So Mr. Trump comes along and doesn't immediately break it. He doesn't immediately crush it. But he does go on a charge account binge, which, to be fair, wasn't his idea. It was Paul Ryan's tax bill in 2017 that actually wrote the thing. Trump very rarely is actually responsible for doing any of the legislation and stuff under his term. He was not a proactive person. He goes out and golf and comes in and signs it and brags about it. But Ryan's tax cut funneled $1.7 trillion. 85% of the tax cut was going to rich people. And it made their life wonderful. And Trump bragged to his rich people down in Mar-a-Lago about it in 2019. And he was presumably right to do so because, boy, he served them well. But it was a ticking time bomb, because in order to keep from busting deficits out through the $1 trillion level, you would have to have a sustained high growth rate, 4% or more. And that did not happen. don't have to take my word for it. In fact, Trump was bragging, oh, it's going to be 4, 5, 6% growth rate. No. The growth rates were on a roller coaster variable, just like the Obama administration. So they were no better, not really worse, but just about the same. Once in a while, flirting with 4%, sometimes only down 2 point something or other. So that meant that coming in the 2020s, after Trump had left office, there would be this monstrous $1 trillion deficit burge that was going to hit, which is exactly what happened. And Biden, amongst all the things they needed to do when they had brief control of Congress, was to kind of redress some of this stuff, which they did as well as I could have expected under the circumstances on it. And we don't have quite the massive bits. The whole trickle-down motif has never been successful in all of my lifetime. And the fact that you have these conservatives in the air quotes GOP still pushing this mentality when it is so objectively wrong, this is the flat earth of economics.
Yeah,
and you also have to remember that an appeal to a mythological past is the hallmark of authoritarian dictators. Well, one of them.
Oh, yeah. Putin does that in Russia on steroids.
Yeah.
Yep. A lot of them. Like a whole lot of them, most of them probably, but I'm only familiar with the ones in the 20th century. But like when you were asking,
David Barton,
when was America great? It's this mythological past. There's a reason that we're where we're at, and it's because we've been fighting so hard to get here.
Yeah, as a historian, I'm constantly looking at the historical precedents and the things that I know from my own personal life that I've lived through because I'm an old fart, and the things that I know because history was my gig. That was my BA in history from college, and the antebellum Civil War. Reconstruction period was one of the major areas. Plus, I was also fascinated with the Roman Empire, which is a test case of how what started out as an interesting Republican experiment deteriorated eventually into an autocratic imperial system that clunked along all the way down to the Byzantines in the 15th century.
Yeah, speaking of that, I always find number 2 on this list interesting thing. It says, dismantle the administrative state and return the self-government to the American people.
Yeah, like that's how that works. No, it's and the recent rulings on the hobbling the powers of congressionally formed administrative rules is so critical. This will only expand independent of who becomes president in 2025, but it's certainly going to have a worse situation if a Trump is president in 2025 as opposed to a Biden or Harris or somebody with a pulse and ethics.
I thought that's what's funny is because they say return the American people unless you want an abortion. Then no, the state decides that, or whatever.
Oh yeah, to be fair, Trump and some of those say, well, they have thrown it back to the states, so the states get to do that. But the problem is you've got your little extremists hovering in the corner that won't settle for that. From their ideological worldview, abortion of a teeny tiny little fetus embryo is instantly murder on the same thing as throwing people out a window when they're 2 years old. They will never rest. They will never slow down. They want that absolute bit. And even if you get a national amendment that would be put through that would be anti-abortion, would Trump seriously not sign it? Would he veto it? I doubt that seriously. He knows which side his bread is buttered on, so that's not likely to be happening in the thing. So we at every single step. Continue reading. Well, let's go down through some more numbers. I'll slip out of bed because I got to get more tea.
Right. Defend our national sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats.
Oh, things to say on that. Oh.
I'm sure it'll be back really quick.
So we think about number 2.
Okay, thanks. Dismantle the administrative state. And again, this is like some kind of Ayn Rand wet dream going on here. They really want this libertarian state where money only goes to the military, and then the rest of us are like fighting to just like pay for our roads, and if you look at it, like they really, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of kind of India's economy, where you have or South Africa's economy, where you have this really super poor and then the really super rich. And you're just continuously extracting wealth from
Well,
the
even
poor.
India is a complicated example because they
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
a surprisingly large middle class, not super
Recently.
rich. Okay.
Recently.
350 million people are in the middle class in India. Now,
Yeah,
they've
but
got
they have
over a
like a
billion
couple
people.
billion people.
Exactly. So it's only a proportion, but there's complex things going on. It's not helping that Modi is a theocratic Hindu nationalist who is trying to do everything and trying to flog the press. And they've got their own little mythology. In fact, one of the things we'll be bringing up in the new book is a little aside about that mythological version of the super Hindu, super science, wonderful world of the past that was under Hindu nationalism. That's just exactly the same counterpart as the fictionalized American exceptionalism that you find in conservative rhetoric. The immigration matter, if there's one thing that is a common thread running through people who are even critical of Trump, like Ann Coulter, and the reason why Ann Coulter was critical of Trump is because he didn't build a wall fast enough. She is a pathological anti-immigration person. And you find the same dog whistling going on with Tucker Carlson and, of course, Steve Miller, who was in the Trump administration and presumably would be in again, are just terrified of immigration. And I, as a historian, look at it and from an individual point of view, and I'm going, what? That this is just the opposite of the American experience. In fact, we can argue that one of the things that helped grease the skids for the Great Depression was the fact that we shut down our immigration laws in the 1920s and started pulling ourselves in. And so we were no longer getting that constant influx of new people who become part of the great American experience. And we had things with the expulsion, both during the 1930s and during the Eisenhower administration, of large numbers of Latino migrants down into Mexico. There's a long and sordid history of things going on here. And whereas I look at it, how many of the migrants at the border are ones who are just coming here to make a better life for themselves? And are there any that are really likely to be a problem in the same way that Trumpistas and Tucker Carlson is a problem? And I would say very few. Some, and of course you find this as one of the dog whistles that Coulter and others constantly blow, because I follow, not following them, but I get feeds popping up on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. And where if a migrant, illegal immigrant, does any crime against anybody, and especially if it's a violent one, bingo, it's being flashed up right on the screen, as if that is just a minuscule number compared to the number who are here and not causing any trouble at all, in fact, are paying taxes. I have been banging the drum that DACA should be codified as law. And the fact that it wasn't is because there's enough cinema style conservatives and that in the Democratic Party that they couldn't even get that through when they've controlled Congress. So you'd need to have way more Democrats, progressives on there to be able to pull this off. But we will not be a sound policy nation until we've gotten DACA passed and enough courts to handle the influx of people coming in here, which the Congress has been foot dragging on this for decades. Refusing to give enough money for all this kind of stuff. And when even poor George Bush, too, tried to get what was probably the most workable immigration reform that they could get in the period, and his own Republican Party scuttled it. So the idea that this is some new mess that's happened, no, this is, most messes that happen are there because of decades of inaction and incompetence.
Yes, if you want to get technical, America has been a land of immigrants starting at 10,000 BC with the Pangea land bridge.
Yes. Even the native First Nation people were migrants here. Although the Hopi and others like to think that they sprang out of a cave and that they are the originalists, but no, it's everybody is a migrant, and we should be proud of it because it's what makes us unique as a nation. Many nations actually are composed of migrating populations. Nothing is more complicated than the migrant history of Britain, where the Picts used to live up in Scotland and the Scots used to live in Ireland, and they came over and kicked the Picts out, and all these Germans came over, and that's why there's the Anglos and the Saxons, and then the French-speaking Norsemen called the Normans came over. I mean, it's just they're a nation of immigrants too. They just don't conceive of themselves that way.
The Danes, the Normans, the everything
Yeah.
else have
So I'm
choice.
not terrified of immigration. Now, I am worried about extremist ideology, but that can come from foreign belief systems and it can come homegrown, like the Project 2025 project. We don't have to look to somewhere else to deal with that. But yeah, their immigration policy, there's so many important things we need to deal with as a nation, and nothing in that
Yeah,
Project 2025 is going to help. And let's see how the nothing is going. Let's get to the next point.
yeah, yeah. That's like terrorism can come from anywhere. It could be the 9/11 people, or it could be the Timothy McVeigh Oklahoma bombing people. They're
Exactly.
American based.
Yeah,
Uh,
and look at there's another thing just to remind us that I can be certain that, oh boy, are there going to be pardons from a lot of the January 6 people if Trump gets into power.
right.
Yikes.
Number 4, secure our God-given individual rights to live freely, what our Constitution calls the blessing of liberty.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd
that's
be
who
very
could
interested
argue.
to know what they mean by blessings of liberty, but their individual
Liberty for
rights to live
their
free.
interests.
Well, I mean, but they have it in quotes. So I'd be really interested to know what they consider to be the quote unquote blessings of liberty. But their right
And
to live
that's why
freely
they're,
seems to be their right to oppress others.
and apparently it doesn't involve the right to sleep outside if you're homeless, as the
Not at all.
Supreme Court has just ruled. Which, you know, our local mayor here, who is a liberal Democrat, is trying to deal around with this. Then there are quite a few states around the country. Some, of course, homeless issues are a major one, but that connects up with another thing that you're not going to find anything serious on in the Project 2025, which is the long-standing problem of our overpriced, inefficient, realtor-based real estate system that has congenitally produced unequal and overly expensive rental properties and made it hard to get houses.
So you think this? Well, more things. You think this would be just to a Congress thing, or to be a Supreme Court thing?
Oh, it's across all the boundary layers of stuff that you have stuff. And remember, we're a federalist system. So you've got things that are happening at the local level, you have things that are happening at the state level, and they've all got their attorney generals and their Supreme Courts and their constitutions that have varying rules back and forth. Some of them are more liberal than others, although we know in some cases that if you have an extremist, they will just bypass and ignore, like some of the anti-abortion people who would bypass the fact that their own state constitutions actually are okay with it written in law, that sort of thing. And then you finally get up to the federal level where you have the House and the Senate and the presidency and the tangling with the conservatives on the Supreme Court. So it's a lot of fingers in the pie. And the fact that you can presume that the thumb is going to be coming down on the conservative culture camp positions more often than not. There will be surprises. Scalia would surprise some people because he was an extreme free speech advocate. So he would be coming down with liberals on some of these things, but yet would be coming down on the creationist side with his dissent from Edwards v. Aguilar. So you have to look at things specifically. The court analysts that have been following this stuff are singling out one of the future kingmakers in this for decisions will be Amy Coney Barrett. That her positions are nuanced enough that she's going to be deciding an awful lot of the agenda, even though she is a culture camp conservative in so many issues. And Roberts, who's technically the Chief Justice, is kind of being sidelined in a lot of these things. The calls that some liberals do for adding people onto the court, president can't do that unilaterally. You think Congress is going to be do it? No, probably not. Certainly while Mike Johnson is speaker, it won't. So you need more people in that front. Some of the stuff require constitutional amendments. That's going to require state majorities to do. So a lot of fingers in the pie.
Yeah, is the Supreme Court thing is that the House approval or Senate approval? I forget.
I think it requires both. It requires actual legislation. It's been expanded a bit before. It didn't start out with 9 Supreme Court justices. So, and the last really serious time was when so many conservatives were throwing monkey wrenches into the New Deal. FDR wanted to pack the court, and that fell apart. President does not have a unilateral power to do that. The other ones, there are quite a few leftists who I see on the Twitter feed signing petitions to impeach or ask for various justices to resign. They're not going to do that. That's just a meaningless gesture. It's a sad circumstance, but unless you, now theoretically, if you had a giant blue wave and you ended up with a lot of progressives, enough to do so, theoretically, some of these justices could be impeached for malfeasance. I think cases could clearly be made for the corruption and incompetence of Thomas, who is a black nationalist ideologue and knee deep in corrupt support from rich power interests and has failed to recuse himself on a variety of cases. And Alito looks like he's falling into some of that boat as well. But boy, you'd sure in hell need, because you've got to get to a high threshold for that impeachment removal from office thing. There have been removals before. I think one or two in the court thing. One, I think, resigned, Abe Fortas, under pressure. And then there was one back in the 19th century. But we're living in unsettled times. New precedents take place. You got to do it. Then the mechanisms are there, but you'd need way more people in Congress to be able to do it.
No, that would be awesome. Yeah, I would love to have like a progressive supermajority. I think it would be enough to get Alito and Thomas to just to step down or quote unquote retire.
And if you have young people who, instead of just simply doing YouTubes proclaiming how annoyed they are with stuff, but actually get involved at grassroots level, because it does no good to just have somebody running at the top on the smart people party, and you don't have a political infrastructure underneath them. The Republicans didn't become what they were in a vacuum. They had Republicans starting to take control of states and cities and the like. You had a time when socialists were even playing at that level. They were doing more than just having Eugene V. Debs run for the presidency. They were actual governors and mayors of cities, and had the reason why we have a social security system is because of socialist mayor, I think it was in Minneapolis or somewhere, ironically enough, that helped push this through. And eventually it got fed in during the Depression as the Social Security system. And it's the reason why I'm still alive, because I'm on Social Security.
Yeah. So, Supreme Court, do you know who appointed each person there and how far, what's the earliest one? Is it Bush Jr.? Is it Bush, H.W. Bush, or was it Clinton, the earliest?
I think Reich pointed out that the supermajority that they have were all appointed by presidents that didn't win the popular vote. Which would be Bush and Trump. And so it's a very intriguing little circumstance involved. I know specifically regarding the three Trump appointees, they are minority power justices, because they were put through on purely partisan votes from senators that represented only 42% of the population. So this is from top to bottom minority power. Trump was a minority president. He didn't win the popular vote, and the justices he put through were a minority pushed through. And that shows you how, when you have the elements of power, even some of the reforms that were trying to be put through under Biden slammed into Manchin, who wouldn't do anything on a lot of the climate issues initially, because, he's got money from coal and he doesn't want to do anything to curtail all of that. Never mind that this is a serious problem. As we positively broil in this heat dome, we're supposed to be hitting 100 degrees or more here in Spokane next week. Fortunately, low humidity here, so it's not quite so disastrous, but it's going to be in the 90s and 100 or so over in the Portland, Seattle area. And a lot of these people never had air conditioners because it never got that hot.
Yeah, it was 100. It hit 100. I think it, or just, I don't know, at least in my area, it like touched 100 for a minute here. It's horrible.
Yeah.
The climate data is indicating, and that another area of sheer evasion, which is that there's nothing in that Project 2025 that even acknowledges, let alone has what to do about it, what to do about climate change, because they don't see it as a problem.
This Section 1, taking the reins of government.
And they've got the court to do it. So that means that we have to be very careful. We can't ever allow a, air quotes, Republican, Trumpista style president, whether it's Trump or not, ever to be president when they've got those nutballs on the court. You could theoretically have a risk of having a more conservative president somewhere decades down the road when the court has changed and we pass laws codifying things and therefore bypassing a lot of the rulings that have been done. But that's not anything likely to happen soon because the Republican Party is not the Republican Party anymore in no way, shape, or form. I remember and have seen the deterioration of it over decades. And this little mess aren't Republicans.
Well, it got shredded during the Trump presidency. I remember that his 2 years, the first midterm election following his presidency, like zero of the Republicans that were up for reelection, they just left, all of them, either resigned or were primaried.
Oh yeah, we've got a purging of the Republicans, of anybody, the Liz Cheney types and all that.
Yes.
Adam Kissinger, who is now supporting Biden. What happens in the long term of whether any new version of a conservative political party can form that is not tainted by that in this, but you can see that the circumstance we can see in Europe, they're still thrashing over whether or not there's going to be a Le Pen government in France. You're finding some of the things where some of the Macronites, who's terribly unpopular, and some of the left wingers are actually kind of joining forces to try to make sure that that party doesn't come into power. But that's the retooled, tidied up version of Le Pen's old racist party. And that's another reason why so much of this political landscape reminds me of the 1920s, where you had authoritarian governments in Hungary, and you had a seesaw between left-wing and right-wing governments in France, and you had, of course, the circumstances with Germany, and finally the chancellor appointing Hitler in 1933. But a lot of that comes about because the Depression happened, and that means economic policies matter. That the stupid economic policies that turned a stock market crash in the United States into a global depression, if you have people who don't know what the hell they're doing, that's how that happens. So it pays a great deal of attention to see that the Federal Reserve is not politicized, that you don't have people with idiot economic policies, and the current Trumpista GOP is just a pileup of really dismal policies. Trump blathers on about getting rid of the income tax and replacing it with excise taxes, which, fine if it's 1845, but it also is colossally inflationary and is just terrible for people in the working class. Giant sales taxes and others. These are just disastrously bad policies. Others want to get rid of income tax and that for other reasons. But boy, this is the bad side of 19th century economics, and we know how that turned out.
Yeah, did the current Trumpista Republicans start with what people call the Tea Party in the
partly, yeah, that was the Clinton era thing, the Newt Gingrich time frame. That it's been a long incremental process and a conscious behind the scene process of extremists taking over the Republican Party at the grassroots level. And they've been busy beavers working on it and gradually easing out liberals and even moderates in there to where you still had a little bit of a holdover, but taking command of the machinery of power. And I think one of the elements that I can see in retrospect, because I didn't see the 1988 convention. I was away on a trip at that time. And had I seen the 88 convention, I voted for George Bush for Bush 1 in 88. Had I seen the convention, I might not have done that, because you were starting to see the extremist Pat Buchanan, isolationist, culture war, anti-abortion clique, as opposed to the more internationalist, middle of the road stuff, conventional business conservatism of Bush. That was percolating in the wings. And in the years since then, it's one of the reasons why I switched over and voted for Clinton in 92 and stayed now in the Democratic voting, because the Republican Party increasingly slid in that direction to the point that science and policy issues absolutely preclude my voting for them because they have all the wrong policies.
Yeah. So Maya, who was your first official old enough to vote for president
Oh,
thing?
an irony, because I turned 18 to vote in the 72 election. And I couldn't vote for Nixon. And there were a bunch of Democrats around who couldn't do that either. And a lot of them didn't want to vote for McGovern because they thought he was too liberal. And I, as a protest vote, voted for McGovern. I didn't expect him to win. I was kind of surprised at how badly he did, but that was my protest vote. And then I was voting Republican for Ford in '76, and then saw the circumstances and the record that Reagan had as a fairly conciliatory governor. He was a right-wing fellow, but compared to where the Democratic Party was way more wishy-washy on the Soviet Union during that period. And that really bothered me. And in retrospect, I was glad to see the Soviet Union disintegrate. And that pressure came on with the Reagan administration. And I was fully in favor of simplifying the tax code. Ironically, Reagan's 40% tax rate for people at the top, it would be higher than the 39.9 that the Biden administration wants to put back in. So just how liberal conservative are we on these little things? But I was always a little worried about, and in retrospect, very worried, finally, about the bad dictator coddling policies that Reagan was doing in Central America, which just had no help at all in this matter. And so when Clinton came along with that centrist, middle of the road 1992 Democrats, I'm going, my God, this is the best Republican candidate the Democrats have had in years. So shouldn't we be encouraging the Democrats to move to the center? And so I voted for him and voted for him again, even though he was now in an impeachment embroilment and all the rest. And then because the Republicans had been now taken over by this, even though they tended to field more or less middle of the road Republicans, the problem was I knew the baggage that was being carried by the enablers of the Republicans. And that's why I haven't been able to support a Republican ever since. I've had to hold my nose through some of the Democrats that I voted for, Gore and others. But it's because the alternative I felt was too worrisome, that these people were increasingly hyper ideologues and that there would be bad policies at a time when we needed good policies. And it's only gotten just escalating off the shot in the last 10 years.
So Maya, as being the young one of this group, who was your first introduction to the presidency election?
We are still the same age.
And I tell everybody that's young that remember the decisions that you make this year and in all the elections from now on are the things that are going to be contributing to the life you're going to be leading and may or may not being able to reach my age.
Yeah,
these are momentous.
I keep thinking I'm old, well, not toward the RJ obviously, but I think I think since I'm in my 40s, I'm old.
Yeah, well, everybody has that aspect.
I guess you're as young as you feel, so I'm the oldest one here.
Now, I'm not planning on checking out anytime soon. I fortunately come from a family that's fairly long-lived, so I'm looking forward to another 20 or 30 years of being a busy, annoying beaver.
Yeah, I turned 20 during the Gore Bush election.
Same.
That was my voting.
Yeah. I was just watching.
I did my protest vote was, I think, Green Party that year, just because I really didn't like either of them.
Yeah, the difficulty is that's the factor that comes into the whole notion of independent parties. That anybody that wants to be serious to run for president on a third party had jolly well better have an infrastructure of their party already in place at the state level and nationally, so that they have some mayors and governors and people in their representatives, and so that there's a cadre of people. Otherwise, if by some preposterous miracle you win the presidency, which ain't going to happen anyway, is that you are a president with two opposition parties. You don't have a support base. This is a recipe for a mess. And it doesn't matter whether they have correct policies or incorrect policies. What difference does it make if you can't get them through because you don't control the Congress? Yeah,
and also, I'm just glad that this current third party have a voice, really. But Has there ever been a third party candidate besides the 92, 96 election that was actually on the debate thing with the big two? Like,
oh, Ross Perot. Yeah.
yeah,
Now, that was one of the biggest showing, but he also is a candidate without a party behind him. There were no Perotites serving in any capacity, anything below that. He would have been the imperial president who would come in and try to decree like he was running his oil company. And that's not how politics works. That's part of the problem why Trump bungled things so spectacularly during his first term, is because he didn't know how any of it ran, other than trying to grease the skids of regulators in regards to building his little projects. That was the extent to which he bumped into governance, but he had no idea how to run any of this stuff. Now,
yeah, I heard Perot was one of Trump's inspirations when he first tried to run in 2000.
oh, well, before, yeah, that's when he was trying to be a Democrat. He doesn't tend to talk about all of this, but he initially tried to get political things under the Democratic Party, because that was where he was coming up in the world of New York, where Hillary Clinton was doing fundraisers and blah, blah, blah. It was all connected up in that network. And so he had very different policies that he was pushing through. But unfortunately, even the New York Democratic Party requires that you have a functioning brainstem and some degree of ethics. And so that pretty much ruled him out on the Democratic ticket. They were happy to accept his checks as donors, but forget that. So his political career in the Democratic Party went down like the Trump-tanic. So he then clearly sat back and watched and looked and retooled and realized, holy smokes, there's another group, the Republicans. And can I con them? Oh, I know exactly what to say to get their buttons going. Anti-abortion judges on the court, blah, blah. That's their hyper litmus test. This is the Jay Sekulow, Tony Perkins worldview, Pat Robertson. This is the obsession of that culture camp creationist network for decades. And all he needs to do is no skin off his nose. He doesn't have a uterus. He could advocate this without any conviction problems. And so, and he also, not without some justification, but also not entirely correct, to think that conservative judges that he would put that would be anti-abortion would also give him a green light for anything he wanted to do in the courts. And that hasn't always worked out the way he wants.
Yeah, and I think I was talking about this a little bit earlier too, but it's really important to understand like why third party is such a throwaway vote. And that's because there's no one for them to caucus with in either the House or the Senate, which means like there's no function. Like a president just signs the final bill. It has to go through the House and then through the Senate before it hits their desk. Yeah. If there's no one for them, they don't write bills. They don't write policies. They don't do any of that. They appoint people to do stuff for them. So if they don't have their people on the ground making policies, no policies get through. Like they would have to choose one side or another to caucus with, to do their, I don't know, lack of better terms, their bidding. And so this is more or less why people say third party is throwaway vote. You have to lay the groundwork. We have to get senators and representatives in there before we vote in a third party president.
And a track record of accomplishment. So you have ones where we say, here we are, our little X party, and we've put through these wonderful things in the city or the governor that we've been having, and we're showing that it works well, and we get reelected on it. And of course, that's something that impatient people aren't going to want to sit still for. Good dodge. You mean you've got to work for decades to build up an infrastructure and a network before you can get the top spot at president? Yeah. And so that's why the secondary party approach. Now, the one thing it can do is function as a spoiler. Now, third party candidates, it won't make a damn bit of difference whether Robert Kennedy Jr. is on the ballot in Washington or Idaho. Biden is going to carry Washington and Trump will carry Idaho. And there's not a snowball's chance in hell of that changing. But in battleground states where only a few hundred votes may make the difference on there, it's theoretically possible that that can do a spoiler in the same way that Nader did in Florida for Bush in 2000. And I think that this is just catastrophically bad. Another area, of course, is the whole Gaza issue in isn't it Wisconsin, where they're Wisconsin or Michigan, one of the two, where there's a heavy number of Muslims, and we had in a Faves meeting, and there a local Muslim woman who was just holding back the fierce anger that she was feeling over what was going on, because she has relatives in that have been blown to smithereens in that conflict. And so that potentially has the effect of either having people sit out or vote third party because they're pissed off at the Biden policies on Gaza. But if that gives you a second Trump administration through the Electoral College, that ain't going to be helping Gaza or Muslims in general.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's important to have this kind of background, but besides Trump, was there any president in history that didn't have either a military background or a background in either governance?
Oh, zero. By and large, everybody that's been in president has had some experience other than the founding father level in the early stages, when they couldn't have had because there wasn't a government for them to be in there. But they tended to be either in Congress or senators or governors. The ones standout, the ones
states, a general.
Yeah, and that would apply to several of the 19th century ones who were mixed bag as presidents. But in the modern times, in the 20th century, only one was the general, and that was Eisenhower. And he showed by the tasks that he needed to do, everybody courted him. The Democrats tried to get him to run for president on the Democratic ticket in 48, and then finally kind of jumped and came in on the Republican side. And by that time, the Korean War was on, and so there were other issues and things going on. But he had administrative skills and an ethical element on there. As somebody said at the time, you could have elected Eisenhower on the laundry ticket. He was, an immensely popular person at the time, and that he was president when I was just a little tyke. I was born technically when Truman was president, but most of my very early years were under Eisenhower, and Nixon was his vice president, and so that little handover. But in Trump's case, it shows the absolute insanity of anybody that has never had political office becoming president on the fly. The same rule would apply to a Vivek Ramaswamy. He's, a business nerd and idiot. Trump was in double whammy on this, because he made the argument, I'm a stupendously good businessman, and I will be applying those stupendous businessman skills to be a really stupendous president. Well, there's no indication that that equation was true in any way. There's no indication that just because you're a fabulously good businessman, that you will therefore have the skill sets to be a good leader, where you have to do compromise and do things that are not in your own self-interest. So I wouldn't want Henry Ford or Bill Gates to be president of the United States. But the first part of the equation was also wrong. Trump is not a great businessman. He's a terrible businessman. He has more bankruptcies than ex-wives. He managed to bankrupt a gambling casino, for Christ's sake. I mean, how bad of a businessman do you need to be to manage to lose money on something that is a license to print profit? Well, he managed it because he overplayed his hands. Oh, and not only that, this is a thing that I wish more people had known about in 2016. It was certainly not a secret, and Trump never mentions it. When the casino was about ready to open, the Taj Mahal, there were several reporters who were covering this to look at it. And both of them were spotting the fact that, oh God, this thing is overpriced and there's too many debt load, and the market in Atlantic City is really not very good to sustain this stupid thing. And so it's really kind of going to tank. And Trump learned about this stuff, managed to hush up one of the reporters, and the other one wouldn't get hushed up. So he pressured the employer, the magazine, to fire him. That's Robert K. Johnston. That still is doing stuff.
Yeah,
so before he became president, before he became the guy who could appoint the FBI lead, before he would be the commander in chief, as a private citizen, bully Donald Trump was able to suppress reporting that correctly predicted that the Taj Mahal casino was going to fail, which it did. That was one of the many reasons why I was adamant that Trump never be president of the United States, and everything that's happened since has confirmed my suspicions were well taken.
Yeah, I've heard people on well, I see this on Twitter and Facebook all the time. People are saying, "Oh, Trump denied the 2025 project." I don't know if that's true or he did that publicly or just
Well,
No,
privately.
yeah,
he's
he did it
distancing.
on he did it on Truth Social this week.
Yeah, he took his usual, I don't know anything about it. I haven't read it. I don't know anything about it. Just like he always never knows about anybody that gets into trouble on things. I don't know anything about David Duke. I've never heard of any of these people.
Never even heard of Epstein. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the standard procedure with Donald Trump. That this was behavior that had always existed along the road. Trump is somebody that can never be wrong on anything. And if he sees, he's not a completely oblivious to reality person. When he would realize that there was downsides for the abortion matter and downsides on this Project 2025, or if anybody is a political supporter that seems to have a problem for him, he can suddenly just turn around and say, I don't know anything about it. And this is in part because he's a disinterested mini tyrant. He doesn't do anything. He never does anything. He has other people do it for him. This is the whole structure of his legal environment, as he had in the old days with Roy Cohn, and then with Michael Cohen more recently. He's, like I describe him, he's always in Henry II mode. Who will rid me of this meddlesome priest? He doesn't do any of this stuff. Fix this for me and get back to me when you've done it. That's the approach that he does. So in many respects, he probably hasn't read the Project 2025 thing. And on some little quibble things, he says, oh, I disagree with most of it. I don't know anything about it, but I disagree with most of it. What is contradictory about those positions?
Another interesting thing I know, it says the 8th grade reading average scores.
There's a lot of issues about education policy, things about what policies are done, some of the reading skills stuff that has been done in a lot of school districts over the last 20 years were the wrong ones and didn't work very well. I was somebody that learned to read really quick and was continued jump-started because we had basically what we call a phonics project up in Washington State when I was a kid. And that was put me way ahead of California that had a different approach when it went down there in the early 1960s. And I coasted along for years until I got back up to Washington State. So there's a lot of stuff going on in that area. But groups who, one, don't accept the idea that there should be any national education standards at all, and two, are from a network of people who want Christian nationalists, creationists, conservative views presented, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, in charter schools or in secondary things, or if we can get it through in the actual public schools. These are not the people that you should be trusting to make any reasonable education reforms that are going to help anybody either to read better or to be better citizens.
So, as somebody who, both of us who grew up in the us for the 80s and 90s, and you for like the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, is education different now than it was then, or is it worse, better in America, you think?
It's an interesting bit. It'd be fun to ask somebody like Jackson, who's currently in the collegiate environment, or Erica, or various other ones, what their take is on the pulse of things. There is the degree to which you have a polarization and politicization of a lot of issues. And this is not the first time that's happened. There was a lot of that back in the 1930s. So this is not the first time that's happened. I know that even in my own experience, it varied state to state. I do know that the level of physical infrastructure that we have in Washington State is glaringly different than Louisiana. One of my relatives happens to be a school teacher, and I think she's now retiring in the Louisiana school system. And I have physically walked through one of their junior high school, middle schools, they call them down there. I guess they call everything middle schools now, everywhere. A few years back to see what they were looking at. And I was just appalled at how old and limited and the reading material and the resources that they had. It was like third world backward. It was just awful. The educational system in Louisiana is highly underfunded. And this was a complaint where she would have to be buying equipment and pencils and things for the class. All the school teachers who are dedicated to this kind of stuff have to supplement this with their own sweat equity. This is so different from the brand new middle school, Glover, that's just been opened up just within walking distance of where I'm at, and the
Yeah.
gigantic computer media systems that are available in these schools locally, and in our public library system that we have, that we have a very different way of looking at things in Washington State. So there's a tremendous variation on things. And I would say that in terms of the resources and capabilities that people have, it's a golden age potentially in some places.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
in other places where you don't have the money, you're stuck in 1948.
yeah, wasn't that the thing though? It's, in early immigrant people, like one of the reasons they came here was to get a better education. Is that even true anymore?
Well, it is the case that every immigrant group that comes in, the people who are already here, especially that have been here for a couple generations, can't stand the change. And so they're horrified. Oh my gosh, you've got Italians. Oh my gosh, you've got Jews. Oh, Lordy B, you've got all of these people that don't look like us. And a lot of them are coming in. The first generation often don't learn English, although my German ancestor that came over immediately jumped into learning English because he said it's the language of the United States, and that's what I'm going to do. He was in effect a draft dodger, fleeing conscription back in the little German principality that they had come from. And
was that before Germany was a thing, or after Germany came?
It went way back. Yes, because my on that side of the family, my lord, I seem to think it was probably around the early years of the German Empire, but it was particularly this little principality in that was the case. I seem to think he came over in like the 1880s or 90s, somewhere in there. It's ridiculous. My dad was born in 1905 when Teddy Roosevelt was president, and my grandfather was born when Andrew Johnson was president. So it's a long time frame on that. But anyway, back to the educational issue and the details of what happens with immigrant groups. Often you have the initial group will have their own language enclaves. They'll be staying in particular areas. They'll have their own newspapers in their foreign language, and all of that scares the shit out of xenophobes. But the second generation has become Americanized, and they'll have English as their first language, and they'll still maybe be able to speak the language of their parents and grandparents and all of that, and feel a little embarrassed by them when they have to deal with that aspect. That's been a traditional bit with immigration groups in the United States. And so it's what happens after that as they become acclimated and they become Americanized, and they put their own infusion of their culture and their attitudes and broaden the mix of what we accept on things. And it's been a constant move on that.
Yeah, I've heard that somebody said once that some American citizens couldn't pass a history test, but they get the immigrant for the citizen test sometimes.
Yes. Well, and the degree we have, we used to have an old high school bowl here that was based on the college bowl that was on television way back in the 60s and 70s, and it's been revived recently, and it's a civics bowl that's on our local PBS channel. And so all the various high schools have people who come in from the various classes, and it's all on civics questions. It's all on what the nature of government is and what the history of the country is and all. And oh my gosh, some of this stuff I'd have to look up to go, what the hell was the provision of this particular amendment and all the rest. And how common that is another matter. But we have come to be the way we are as a nation on the backs of every generation that came before us and all the actions that were done. And Maya brought up the pseudo history that is what a bit of that American exceptionalism thing. I've bumped into the yipes, suddenly forgot his name, pseudo Jefferson scholar. brain fart on that. Anyway, there's a bunch of people that fall into that thing. Dinesh D'Souza's propaganda falls into that aspect. They have this idealized world of the past. There's a 1776 project that's put out by a conservative think tank that cherry picks the little thing. They're accepting of Black people and civil rights in general and women's progress and so forth with general, but yet they're also very, very cagey, because like when they get to that 1920s, 1930s issue about government and the need to do stuff during the Great Depression, suddenly they're sounding like Calvin Coolidge conservatives on this, and they just are missing a lot of the points on stuff. So there is a one thing that surprised me about the younger generation is you have a real upsurge in full-out socialists that to some extent is because they've never lived in a socialist country. And of course, it also depends on the definition of what we regard as socialists. The culture camp Trumpistas bandy that term around very loosely, and communist as well. So they would be describing things as socialist or communist. That's not. Excuse me. When I drive to Seattle, I'm on a socialist highway, the interstate highway system. It's not a privately funded thing, and it's not a toll road like the barbarian East where they have toll highways. You try to put a toll highway in Washington State. The one toll thing that we have in the entire state that I know of is a bridge that goes across Lake Washington in Seattle. And the people who want to cut and not have to go all the way down to I-90 to get into Seattle and get in there faster will use that toll highway. I refuse to use it because I don't believe in toll highways at all. Highways should be free for everybody.
That's why they call it a free. That's why I call it a freeway.
Yeah. And so there is a matter that level of, on the one hand, we may have less separating us than we like to think. But so long as we're in circle the wagon modes between Fox Trump Pravda sets and MSNBC crowds or CNN, and I, by the way, don't get cable television and that anymore, so I don't have to worry about that end of it. We have really good channels here in Spokane that I don't need to worry about that. But so long as you add that circle the wagon motif, which is a very natural thing for people to do, we know, independent of Trump, that if you put a little law up proposal and ask people, do they favor it or not, and label it Democrat, Democrats will favor it and Republicans won't. And if you flip it over and call it Republican, the Democrats will oppose it more often than not, and the Republicans will favor it, even though the content hadn't changed, because they're polarized based on their political affiliation. This is a property that exists independently of the current hyperpolarization that we have.
Yeah, I think the only reason they have people even have toll roads anymore at this point is because the Republican federal government, whatever, the state government, has lowered the taxes so much that the taxes can't even pay for the roads.
Well, yes, they have to be basically financed on site. Our World's Fair that totally revamped the city. We tried again and again and again for years and years and years to get bond issues to revitalize the downtown, and they didn't quite make it to the 60% needed. They would get like 58. They would pass, but not enough. So they never got happening. And it was only because a group of very motivated business people, one of whom owned a department store that no longer exists, that's gone amalgamated away. I remember when there used to be department stores. They were fascinating, wonderful places. Oh my gosh, there's a different world, which I regret that there's an availability of shopping at a social structure of shopping that's very different in today's world, where we do too much on the internet and too much of stuff that's done on smartphones and that kind of compartmentalization. And we're going to have to work that out as a culture. But at any rate, that the people that were able to pull together the Capitol and people that were working at the Burlington Northern Railroad and that could simply decree that their company would pull their railroad set out and consolidate with the Great Northern and that, so that they would be running to the south, and that they would clear everything away and create the future site for the fair, and then the Riverfront Park that's a jewel of the city to this day. That took personal initiative because they couldn't get the damn people to support it in public bond issues.
Okay, so real fast, we've hit the 2-hour mark. Do you think you have to go, or can you still talk?
Oh, I can stay on because you know me, I never wear out.
About you, Mai, do you have to go, or can you?
I'm getting a little hungry, but
okay.
I think
I can well understand that.
I just want to know if you need to have to go or anything. Or
I think we've covered an awful lot of the material. I think
Mhm.
that we've hit the bases on the major factors. Um, the Project 2025 report is boring as shit and very
I
couched in vagaries.
Yeah, I can't even
But
find
you,
anything major. I think I was
yeah,
scrolling through 450 pages so far. I haven't found anything really big to talk about, and I'm
No,
halfway through it.
that's by design. They want
yeah.
it to they
So,
want to
so
put you to sleep so that you don't realize what you're reading.
yeah, and what you need to look at is the people that are connected to it and what they're saying outside of just that little narrow bubble, what they're saying to their believers. There was just a little thing that was on Twitter that was so diagnostic. I think can't remember whether it was Mehdi Hassan or somebody else who was putting the link up to it, but apparently um, a local religious group is trying to get a curriculum of Bible teaching in a school district. And they went ballistic because a local reporter has posted their curriculum online so everyone can see it. And I'm going, excuse me, but what kind of education would it be that you would not be proud for anybody to see the curriculum? Unless you're trying to put it in stealth. And that's why you have to see what people say at CPAC or at Tony Perkins's voter summits that he does every year, and these various conservative conventions that pop along, and some of which are more overtly nationalist than others, and the Moms for Liberty kind of connections and all of that. Those are where the worldview that is reflected up at the tip of the iceberg is actually laying out the extremist agenda when they're speaking to the extremists that they're appealing to. And you need to pay attention to that aspect as well. And if it doesn't scare the bloody shit out of you, then yipes, you need to open your eyes.
So, last thing, we go this topic here. When did the Republicans, or they always been anti? I think, like you mentioned with Nixon, when did they stop doing that to the anti climate change people?
Oh, the signal kind of glitched up on there. What we were saying about the anti what?
Climate change people. You mentioned that Nixon started.
Oh, yeah, that's been a complex mix. By and large, Nixon and Bush one were in the kind of pay attention to at least a little bit of the science part in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, so that you couldn't classify Bush as being rabidly anti-climate change. He was kind of wishy-washy at some elements, not quite as proactive as you found in the Clinton administration and Democrats after that. But the undercurrent of that culture camp worldview that has taken over the Republican Party, they have been anti-environmentalists from the get-go. And it's that worldview that Jerry Falwell back in the 60s and 70s would have been representing, along with his anti-abortionism and
But like
the business interest.
God's gonna destroy this world anyway, so who cares? Idea, you mean?
Well, it was a reflection of the big business attitude. They were not particularly in favor of any environmental rule that was going to be stomping on people who had bank accounts. And they would find ways of doing stuff. You found, of course, look at the whole climate disinformation material that was being fomented by the oil industry, and the people involved in that, in the political arm, would be accepting that. But you did find some exceptions. There was somebody that was interviewed on NPR, it's been a couple of years ago, I think, who was being presented with this propaganda about climate issues, and ta-da, he started functioning like a source methods person. He decided to look into the documentation they were offering. And that's when he discovered this was all claptrap. It was all wrong. They were getting their facts wrong. And so he changed his view about that. Now, whether or not he's still in the Republican Party, or probably not, that it's extremely difficult. Another waffler who's now leaving because she's not running for re-election is Kathy McMorris Rogers from my district. She has, it's like nailing Jello to the wall to ever get her to say clearly what the hell she thinks about climate change. So she will veer off onto subjects about the contentious issue about what to do with dams, and she's kind of okay with some elements of windmills and electric things, but then at the same time, very wishy-washy about what she's doing about issues of carbon dioxide and all of that
Yeah.
element. And so they'll just skirt around the subject. So the vast majority of what you hear at the political level is meaningless boilerplate.
Yeah, I understand why the business people are anti-climate change because not doing coal and stuff is cost money. But I never understood why the religious people are anti-climate change.
About why though? Who?
Oh, well, most religious people aren't. There is actually
No, yeah, again, it is
pro-environmentalist.
Yeah. And you have to
group,
remember, like
within
he's
the Christian.
saying, it is money. It is the moneyed interest. If you want to put it back to someplace, do it back to Citizens. They're ruling on Citizens United. That came out of that was a Scalia thing too, right? Like he wrote the majority decision on that.
Oh, good Lord.
Citizens United. But again, once we get money into politics, we have, you know, the right and the left is deciding where they're going to get their money. So the right is getting their money from big oil. You have the left getting their money from like clean energy. And this is largely why you're seeing the divide on the right and left with climate change. The right, following their donors, is saying, you know, we want deregulation. So we want to be able to pollute the air. We want to be able to pollute the water. We want to be able to pollute the land. And we want to be able to dig for oil. And the right is touting this because that's where they're getting their money from. And
well, and that applies to Manchin because he's coal fortune.
Manchin,
drill baby drill was sort of something that Kathy McMorris Rogers would say to her speech audience, but not necessarily in a debate context. And so there was an awful lot of hide the ball. But independent of the money angle, the anti-environmentalist theme has been a staple of culture camp conservative creationism for 50 years, that they have a worldview in which the environment is God created and human beings can't possibly affect it. And besides, the second coming is going to be happening any minute. That's part of the thing that you get from some of the end times people. James Watt's position, although he lost his position because it was too extreme even for the Republican Reagan administration, but James Watt, when he was saying we don't need serious environmental rules because Jesus is coming back soon enough and creating a new world. And so it doesn't really matter, does it? And even the Reagan people were going, yeah, I don't think so. But that kind of attitude
has been fringed up until recently. Mm-hmm. Recently, you have the right co-opting the religious. So you can't be a Christian and a Democrat. It's because the Democrats are demonic. I mean, it has been really recent.
Yeah, that's the thing. When Trump elected, I didn't care that much. Like, whatever, Trump's president, I don't care that much. The first thing I remember him doing was getting us out of the Paris Accord thing. First.
Yeah, that was the primary circumstance of it, which was a disastrously problematic thing to do. And he still obsesses about trivial things. You know, he's got the bit about the sinking electric boat and the swirling sharks. That's apparently one of his little shticks that he does in his speeches now. Like, that's the thing. I hate to tell the guy, but we make electric boats. They're called submarines. And they don't seem to have a problem doing that. They even have atomic engines. They managed to pull that out. They don't have to worry about breaking apart.
You're going staticky. You're going robotic a little bit.
Yeah, but also with Trump, you have to remember that it was racist. They were hell bent on undoing everything that Obama did. And the Paris Climate Change was Accord. Was one of those. In addition to, which is why they were so big on the ACA, they didn't want it because it was an Obama thing. They wanted to undo everything that he did.
I love a rule. If you're the head of a company that pollutes, you have to live where the factory is. I can see I'm
cutting out a bit.
Yeah, you know, oh well. Yeah, I probably have to leave because it looks like so. Had a wonderful chat. Hope it was a good time. Bye.
I heard Obama.
Yeah, so since we can't get his final words, I don't have anything coming up on my channel currently planned, but what's coming up on your Bad Science Sunday this week?
Tomorrow we will be talking with the Kentucky Atheist about fun stuff, trying to narrow that down now. So, but yeah, it's going to be fun.
Any other planned things coming up on your channel, or you wait
Oh
until
yeah, on Monday at I want to say 8 o'clock Central. I'm going to be on Skeptic Haven with Jay Bundy from Pocket Locker 86, Durante Lamar from Durante Lamar. Like me and Durante have such really fun and what do you call it? Creative channel names. But yeah, well, and then I think there's going to be another person on, and we'll be ushering in a new show on Skeptic Haven that'll be taking part in every other Monday on Skeptic Haven. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, that's what
well,
we have coming up.
well, if any of you haven't subscribed to either Maya or RJ yet, get on it, man. What are you guys doing? And click their little bell icon too, so you'll always be updated. And if you haven't subscribed to me yet, thanks for watching. But we'll subscribe here when it matters too. And obviously, hit that like button and share this video, because all hail the algorithm, our almighty YouTube God. But anyways, you have any final words to say about the subject? Anything we're talking about?
No, thank you for inviting me on. I had a great time. It's always a pleasure. RJ knows so much about so much. It's always I feel honored to be on a show with him. And all I really have to say is vote, please. Like, vote like your life depends on it, because it probably does. And if they get their way with the whole Project 2025 thing, most of your favorite YouTubers probably won't be allowed to speak anymore. So even if you don't think it's going to affect you personally, it will in ways that you're probably not thinking. Inflation will definitely go up, because if you look at most of the right wing states that are behaving, are governing in a way that looks very similar to a theocracy, they're, whoa, hi. Giving me seasickness over here. They are functioning at very low levels. Like they're taking more from the government than they're, what do you call it? Than they're getting, and or than they're giving. Sorry, and it's just, they're not functional economies, and I don't know. It's scary to think about, and there's a lot of fallout effect, not even just on Americans, but also on non-Americans, because the dollar right now is like the world currency. So doing things that will hinder our economy and weaken the dollar are going to have worldwide effects on that too. So I want you to be very careful about what you're voting for, and how that's going to look in the long run, because the people who are making these policies, or like that go into Project 2025, they're not civic minded, and they're also not economists. And when governments try to take on these policies, the economy suffers for it. So please vote, and please be very mindful about what you're voting for.
Yeah, I heard some sirens. They're coming for you already.
Yeah, I have a window open. I forgot to shut it before I started, and there is an ambulance going by, so I do apologize for that.
Yeah. So, anyways, in case we are banned from YouTube by the next year and you never see us again, never stop learning and enjoy the randomness. We'll see you next time, hopefully. Bye.
Bye.